So Paul Delaroche walked into a Paris room in 1839, a very, very successful painter. And he walked out convinced that his profession, his job, was over. The room where he found himself was in the French Academy of Sciences. And what he saw was a man named Louis Degas demonstrating something that didn't even have a name yet. A process that involved a silver-coated copper plate, light, mercury vapor, and an image, fixed, permanent, impossibly precise, something that no human hand had actually made. You gotta understand that Delaroche made a good living painting melodrama. You know, kings getting beheaded, queens in towers, the kind of theatrical historical scenes that wealthy people love to hang in their houses so they could feel cultured. And he, Delaroche, was so good at it. And his work sold a lot. His name, Delaroche, meant something. And standing in that room, he understood immediately that the thing that Degas was showing the world what he could do, capture a face, a moment, a scene in about 20 minutes without training, without years of apprenticeship, without a human being in the room at all, really, beyond someone to work the chemistry. The story goes that he walked out of the room and said, "From today, painting is dead." Except Delaroche probably never said that. As history tells us, quotes like this are largely embellished. But what we know is that Delaroche did see these early daguerreotypes, and he did understand their implications and did eventually come to embrace photography, then reject it. But this quote survived anyway, because it was true enough. And it doesn't need to be completely true, but it does press on a pain point that so many people were feeling and are feeling. It named something real. The terror of watching a machine do what you spent your entire life learning to do. Does this sound familiar? From today, painting is dead. Or maybe the 2026 version is, from today, photography is dead. And like a lot of us, I've been thinking a lot about this lately. Because right now, our version of that room in Paris is maybe a networking event and a conversation on Threads or murmurings in the hallways at conferences like WPPI. Really though, it's all of us trying to figure out what to say about AI. And the quotes we keep reaching for, things like AI will never replace real creativity, or the human eye can't be replicated, or clients will always want authenticity. I wonder sometimes though, is this actually a fundamental misunderstanding or misreading of what's actually going on? So Degas, by the way, was not a scientist. He was more of a showman, and before the daguerreotype, he ran a theater in Paris called the Diorama, where he installed these ginormous translucent paintings that were about 70 feet wide, and they were lit from behind with lamps and colored filters to create this illusion of moving light, sunrise over cathedrals, midnight mass with candles slowly appearing in an empty church, and crowds paid a lot of money to come in and pretend that paintings were alive. It was sort of the original LED screen, which makes this whole thing strange, right? But also fitting, but also ironic that he's now the man that disrupted this entire industry, who's upended painting. But he also didn't work alone. The foundational research of his chemistry experiment really came from a quieter man, a lesser known man named Nepis. And Nepis captured the first permanent photographic image years and years earlier using a process that took about 8 hours of exposure time. 8 hours to create one image. And the crazy part in this whole thing is that Daguerre partnered with him, learned from him, and when Nepis died, Daguerre kept going. His contribution was getting the exposure down from 8 hours to about 20 minutes. And 8 hours, is more of a laboratory curiosity, but 20 minutes is really a commercial execution. Their commercial utility had now been automated. And it wasn't by a smarter, faster, and more talented competitor, right? But by a bath of chemistry and a few minutes of daylight. But the ending of this story is one that we all know. Painting survived. We still have the craft of painting today. But let's be really honest here. It survived by becoming useless. Useless at documentation, at capturing things that needed to be captured for utility. What it became, though, was something far more interesting. Impressionism, which we talked about in the last episode, surrealism, cubism, the work we now study. It didn't come from painters getting faster and cheaper and more efficient. It came from painters who had no fucking choice but to ask a harder and much more interesting question. What does a brush do that light cannot? Really though, above all, these artists traded the record for an opinion. But this, my friends, is not a history lesson. It's more of an autopsy of your work, my work, the work that floods our feeds and portfolios of an industry trying to wrap our heads around AI. This is an audit. It's the moment you open your portfolio and realize your own work has started to look like a stranger's. You look at your professionalism, the safe light, the clean edits, the brand approved consistency, and you realize that you've been operating like a machine for a decade. The AI didn't steal your territory. It actually already vacated it. Well, my name is Patrick Fuller, and this is The Terrible Creative, formerly known as the Terrible Photographer Podcast. And if you've wondered why I changed the name, there's a bonus episode that explains the full thinking. But the short version is that this was never really a photography podcast. And if it was a photography podcast, it was probably a shitty one. I mean, it started out that way, but it quickly became something else. And look, I will never tell you what camera to buy. I don't care. Or how to photograph a bear catching a salmon in its mouth. I don't know how, never done it. But what we're doing here is, I think, something bigger, where you talk about things that matter, what it means to be human and a photographer or designer or writer or a teacher. Really, it's really for any of us trying to make something honest in a world that keeps asking for safe, which, as it turns out, is a pretty good segue into what we're talking about today. Today is episode 56. I'm calling it the Audit. We're going to be talking about three things. We're going to talk about mirrors, reckoning, and what happens when the floor shifts under work that you thought was solid. And to do that, we're going to hop in a time machine. We're going to travel back to Paris. in 1839 to watch painting die, and then come back to life as something nobody expected. Then we're gonna jump back to the present, to a portfolio that I had been scrolling through with a question that I didn't know I was asking until last weekend. And we're gonna sit with something that I don't think anyone in the industry is saying out loud yet. That the fear underneath every AI conversation right now isn't really about the future, but it's about the recognition. It's about work that was already becoming replaceable before AI had anything to do with it. If this is your first episode, I just want to say welcome. If you want to know a good place to start in this podcast, go back to episode 40. It's a start of a 4-part series I call The Long Middle. It's about creative loneliness and what happens when you're so good at what you do and something still feels off. It connects to everything we're talking about today. And as always, my email is in the show notes. Forward all comments, questions, and hate mail there. I read everything. So with all that being said, I know it was a lot. Let's get into it. So last weekend, I was in a room with part of the leadership team of Capture One, the people who are literally designing the tools photographers will use for the next decade. These are people who live at the exact intersection of technology and photography, who are making real decisions right now about what this craft will look like in 5 years. And I went in with questions, and I came out with something different. I came out, surprisingly, genuinely excited, optimistic even. And I want to be specific about what that excitement and optimism was, because it wasn't AI is going to save photography, and it wasn't technology will figure it out, but it was about something quieter than that. The best version of those conversations isn't about what the software can do. It's more about what the software should focus on, you know? The drag, the friction between the moment and the file, the image file. Things like sorting faster, export cleaner, capture, tether more efficiently. Handle the operational weight so that the brain doesn't have to. Because every minute you spend managing a workflow is a minute you're not seeing, not deciding, not being in the room in the way that actually matters. And I think that's where the freedom lives. It's not in a new feature set, but it's in the removal of the obstacle between the photographer and the photograph. That's why I like Capture One. It just sort of gets out of the way. No more varnish, more space. Because the software can't produce an image so honest, so specific, so true to a single moment that it touches someone in a way that they can't explain. That part has never lived in a tool, whether it's hardware or software. And the tools that try to replicate it, that study the most legendary works of photography and build a button to approximate them, those tools are really chasing the ghost of someone else's decision. You can't toggle into a point of view. You can't prompt your way into a point of view. And for me, the various conversations that I had really kept coming back to the same question. Is the utility of photography dead? Are we the new Delaroche? I drove from Los Angeles to my home in San Diego. It's a couple-hour drive, thinking about that question. And when I got home, that question was still warm. It was still on my brain. And I remember I came in the house. I was tired from the trip. And I sort of just laid out on the couch. And my iPad was there. And I picked it up. And I opened Safari. And my website, patrick4.com, shameless plug, happened to be open. And I tapped into the gallery, my overview, and just started scrolling, just sort of looking at my own images. And the questions for me kept coming. Not the clean philosophical kind, but the ugly practical kind. Where do I fit into all of this? How do I leverage AI without becoming replaceable by it? Is AI killing the parts of photography that maybe need to die anyway? And if AI can replicate my work, not someday, but now, today, what the hell am I actually doing? How do you ride the bull without getting trampled? And look, I don't have clean answers to these questions. I don't think anyone has clean answers to these questions. But what I had laying on that couch was a gallery full of my own work and a question, a really big question I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. And if I'm honest with you, when I look at the images on my website, which are still there right now, some of them I think hold up, but some of them don't. Some of them don't deserve to be there. I was thinking about a specific image. It's coming to my head right now. I'm not going to tell you what it is or who the client was, but I can describe it. It was a clean, well-lit, technically precise image, product lifestyle. A person in a specific environment doing a specific thing that communicates a specific on-brand message. And the client was happy. The creative director, I still have it saved, sent a one-line email that said, perfect. I invoiced them, got paid, I moved on. They were happy. I was happy. The images were good. I moved on. And then as an experiment, laying on my couch, I opened my laptop and I went to Google Gemini, which is Google's AI platform. And what I had was I had my iPad open with this image and had my laptop. And I just, for about 4 minutes, described the image in my portfolio. It only took 4 minutes. And what the AI showed me was roughly about 15% away from what I made. Maybe 10 if I kept refining the prompt. 4 minutes. 4 minutes versus days of pre-production meetings, casting talents, looking for location, showing up early morning, setting up, shooting all day, coming home, tired, retouching images, versus 4 minutes. It's a specific kind of hollow, you know. You're looking at a frame the client put on a pedestal, a shot they're calling perfect. They said it themselves in the email. They called it perfect. And you realize that you strangled the life out of it somewhere between the first frame and then the final export. The life is gone. The humanity was gone. And it wasn't the client's fault, I don't think. The image survived the brief. It just didn't survive the professionalism, that internal instinct to sand down the truth until it was smooth enough to be safe. It wasn't just the client work in my portfolio. When I kept scrolling into my personal work, the test shoots, even the passion projects, the images I made when no one was asking for anything. There was no client brief. I began to see some of the same patterns, same things that stuck out, right? It was the same safe compositions, the same comfortable distance from anything that might have been difficult or strange or true. And that one surprised me more than the Gemini test did. Morgan, what's up, man?
Oh, just having a lovely chill Saturday afternoon.
This is Morgan Turner. He's been shooting commercial work for a while, and he's been doing it long enough to have watched a lot of surprisingly game-changing tools come and go. I didn't warn him. I just called him and asked him about his own portfolio. Hey, I just have some questions for you. Hey, I'm looking at your website, and I'm talking about AI right now, and I'm just curious.
Yeah,
looking at your work, which is all amazing work. You got some outdoor stuff, some landscape in your portfolio, got some portraits, all really good work.
Oh, thank you.
But I want you to think about the last 3 jobs or images that you posted. If I created briefs for AI prompts into Google AI or Midjourney, how close could I get to recreating the images that I see?
Oh, man. I guess really that would depend on how elaborately you could write that prompt. Like the more detail you could plug in there, obviously, then AI is going to have an easier time figuring out what you want. I'm also trying to think back of like what my most recent posts were on there. But if I'm just thinking of the last jobs that I shot, the major differentiator with AI being able to replicate it is the authenticity to the client. So in that sense, AI definitely can't, because AI can't produce the exact food that a particular chef created and plated. AI can't produce the exact interior of a custom built home that a builder and interior designer created. Like AI could make a really nice looking interior space, and it could be sold as, that sort of thing, but it wouldn't be that other person's work. It wouldn't be an accurate depiction of what we were actually photographing.
Unless, just to push back on that, let's say I was a part of the company, part of the restaurant, and I took photos with like my iPhone, right, of a plated dish in a plated restaurant.
Yeah.
Or the interior of a house. It's not good. It's not at your level, but I could say, use this existing architecture, use this exact plate to produce an industry standard product photo or food photo or interior photo.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I hate it. I mean, because you're quite right that can be done as well. Like if you've got an existing base image and you just say, take this, but make it look pretty, like AI can do that. And it's scary as shit.
You shoot a lot of landscapes. You shoot a lot of personal works. I assume these are not for clients. When you're out there making these images, what are you actually doing? Like, what's your motivation for being out there? And do you think AI changes what that means or changes why you go out there at all?
Honestly, the landscape and kind of personal work stuff is just a creative outlet for me. It doesn't necessarily mean anything other than just making art for the sake of making art because I like to, and because that's how I see the world. I'm not shooting for somebody else. I'm just creating because it brings me joy. Like to compose a shot, make the image, feel good about it, that sort of thing. And it also is capturing a place that I've actually been. So like I have seen that view. And so when it comes to AI for that kind of thing, I mean, AI is definitely not going to give me any kind of emotional satisfaction for creating an image. And when I see an image that actually is AI of a landscape, it's not a real place. It doesn't feel the same way, even like looking at other people's landscape work as well, to know that they were there, shot that image. That's something that they saw, is entirely different than an AI image. An AI image just doesn't really have a soul to it, I feel.
You were talking about like, it's sort of personal fulfillment, right? It's enjoyment. Like I would take from that, like you enjoy the process, you enjoy being out there, you enjoy making images. So at that point, is the image sort of beside the point, right? The art no longer, like the art comes second to the experience of making the image.
Honestly, I don't know if I've ever really thought of it that way, but yeah, because it wouldn't be any different than if I was going out there to sit with a canvas and easel and paint what I was seeing, or to go out and write lyrics to a song inspired by what I was looking at. Like it's going out for this to create whatever it is that you're doing. And that's just kind of the environment that I'm in and what I'm seeing in the art form that I practice.
If no one ever like looked at your landscapes, your personal work ever again, you didn't post them, you just did them for you because they fulfilled you, you found them enjoyable. Would you still go out and make them?
Absolutely. I probably only shoot like 10% or post 10% of what I shoot anyway. Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm creating it for me. That's what client work is for, if you want to shoot for other people. But the landscape and art and like just general creative stuff, that's 100% for me. And if somebody else appreciates it, cool. And if nobody ever saw it, I mean, I would still want to shoot it.
Morgan, hey, thanks for your time. It was good talking to you.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, Patrick.
So here's the question that I really want to ask us all. And it's harder than, can AI replace us? But were we already shooting like AI before AI showed up? Because I think if we're really, really honest with ourselves, maybe we were. You know, you had a sea of images, just a flood of images from other photographers that we saw, we consumed daily, sometimes for some of us, hourly, on our phones, from amateurs and pros alike for years. And all of these images rewired how we saw. And it wasn't just in the comparison and self-doubt kind of way. That was real too. But in a more systemic way, it trained us, cautiously or not, to shoot like everyone else, right? And the flood of cheaper gear, the smartphone cameras, they didn't help much either. But these platforms really handed us an audience. All of it had a cost that we didn't notice that we were paying. It was a tax. We stopped shooting for truth and documentation and creativity and art, right? And we started shooting for algorithmic legibility, for trends, hashtags, for the scroll, for our buddy who is also on Instagram. And we shot images by the hundreds. We shot overcast landscapes. We shot latte art on distressed wooden tables. We shot laundry mats at night with neon signs. We shot moody portraits, shallow depth of field, flat gray skies, safe compositions, exaggerated negative space, desaturated warm tones, work that looked like it came from a discount art store. All of this work, all of these images were professional-ish, right? They were consumable, but they were also forgettable. And the market rewarded us for it. And maybe even we rewarded us for it by the likes, by the follower counts, by convincing ourselves that we were being innovative. But what we were actually doing was handing Instagram and then Meta and every other platform billions of images to learn from every single year. We built the training data. We formed the pattern. We fabricated the cage. And then we were shocked when something climbed inside and started to replicate the lock. AI didn't invent average. That's what we all think, you know? It just harvested the billions of images that we posted, we liked, and we commented on and figured out in a very clear, very data-driven way what quality, quote unquote, looks like. And now it outputs a varnished, blended version of all that generic, professional-ish work back at us. And now we're supposed to compete with it, with ourselves, with our 2012 selves. Here's my controversial take. You ready? The photographers who built portfolios and careers on that professional-ish work will be the first to feel the pain of AI. Because that's exactly what AI has been training on since those early days when we were all so fucking thrilled to be sharing our incredible photos online. AI didn't create the current landscape of professional photography. It just held up a goddamn mirror and showed us what we've been making for a decade. And so the fear and confusion you hear in conversations at networking events and the conference panels, that's actually recognition. It's a photographer who spent 15 years, 20 years building a consistent aesthetic, realizing that that consistency is now a $20 a month subscription. And underneath all of the defensiveness is the one question we aren't asking in public. Was my work already that replaceable? Or did I make it that way? And listen, you got to understand, I'm pointing that question at myself first. I'm not standing on a pedestal. I'm not rendering judgment. I'm asking this to myself. And this is not false modesty. When I audit my own portfolio, the images that I think are failures, it's not because that they're technically bad. It's that they're the ones where I showed up as a professional and let myself locked outside. I didn't get beat by a machine. I just stopped being a human. And Delaroche was right about the blast radius. You know, he knew that the daguerreotype, which was Louis Daguerre's silver-plated heist, was the thing that would change the trajectory of human history. But he was dead wrong about what was actually going to end up in the grave. Because what died, it wasn't painting. What died was painting's obligation to document, to record, to be the thing that you commissioned when you needed evidence that something existed. The camera took that job, and painting was forced, furious. It was disoriented, without a business model, to figure out what it was actually for. Look, Monet didn't paint water lilies because he couldn't photograph them. He painted them because photography couldn't do what he was doing. He was painting perception itself, the way light doesn't illuminate things so much as create them, you know? The way a surface shifts in the seconds you're looking at it. The way your memory of a place feels more present than the place itself. This isn't the consolation prize. That's not painting found a niche. That's the thing painting had always been capable of and never fully committed until it had no other choice. And friends, I think we're at that moment, or we're approaching that moment. And it's not a metaphor. It's a structural reality. The commodity work is going to get absorbed. Not all at once, not everywhere, not without a fight, but directionally, yes. And fighting it is like portrait painters in 1840 arguing that their brushwork was more accurate than the daguerreotype. You're not wrong. It just doesn't matter anymore. So yesterday, I had the privilege of photographing a woman, this professor at a local university. She's in her 50s, and she told me when we first met that she had never had her portrait taken ever in her life. And I want you to sit with that for a second, right? And kind of realize how strange it sounds. You know, it sounds normal in the moment, but when you think about it, it's just sort of bizarre, right? You have a woman who has a career and intellect, and nobody had ever forced the world to stop and pay her the kind of specific, unhurried attention that a camera demands. She had been a professional for a long time, 30 years, but she had never been a subject. And we sat outside on a concrete bench. There were students and colleagues buzzing past us. It was just sort of the ordinary, indifferent movement of a campus on a Thursday afternoon. And I was using what I call aspirational lighting. It's kind of what I'm good at. It was motivated by the scene, natural feeling, but with a little extra flourish that makes a portrait feel elevated. It was quality lighting. It was exposed properly. It was Technically, it was exactly the kind of varnish that AI is currently harvesting. And really, though, if that's all I'm delivering, I'm in trouble, because the file, the end file, the file is just the box, the container that the thing lives in. The work, the real work was happening in the space between the frames. The file isn't the point. The file, again, is just a delivery device. Because between the frames, we talked. There was a connection. I wasn't just checking my highlights. I was asking her about her kids, about why she chose her field, about whether her husband, who had lived his whole life in Salt Lake City, was finally ready to try ceviche now that they'd moved to a city with actual good food. No offense to Salt Lake City. She laughed. It wasn't a pose. It wasn't an on-brand approved smile. It was a real jagged moment of joy that changed the shape of her whole face. And it was in that second, I made a frame that only existed because I was standing there, carrying a specific kind of curiosity at a specific point in a specific afternoon on a specific day. Look, AI cannot care about her husband's dinner plans. It cannot be curious about the 30 years she spent becoming an expert in her field. It cannot decide instinctively in the moment which question will finally crack the professional mask and let the human out. And what she walked away with wasn't a raw file or JPEG. It was the experience of being witnessed by a human being who decided she was the most important person in the room. That is the one competitive advantage that doesn't erode, that will never erode. And that is the work that requires you, yes, you, to be in the room. So there's a photograph Christopher Anderson made in the White House. It's part of a series he shot of the Trump administration. And he had access that most photographers never get. Inside rooms most people will never see. The subject is standing formally against a pale wall, nondescript wall. Their hands are clasped, composed, performing authority for the camera the way powerful people learn to perform authority automatically without thinking about it. The frame is relatively clean. The light is pretty flat, generic. On the surface, it looks like a mediocre portrait. Standard portrait. But Anderson, in what I would argue his genius, left the light switch in the frame. Right there, level with the shoulder, in plain sight. Now, a retoucher, maybe even you or me, would have removed it in like 10 seconds. An AI, Google Gemini, would never have included it to begin with. But Anderson left it because he understood that the light switch next to power is a comment. It's a point of view, not a flaw. And then what's really interesting is in the open doorway behind her, half swallowed by shadow, you see Anderson himself, his own reflection on a phone, present in his own image, but not announced, a shadow, while his subject stands in the light. He made himself disappear into the frame that he was building, and in doing so, he pulled the whole thing apart at the seams. The subject trusted him. She stood still. She had no idea what was happening beneath the surface of the photograph. An AI would give you the aspirational version. Even light, clean backgrounds, nothing in the frame that doesn't serve the subject's preferred self-image. A portrait that flatters the institution. But Anderson made a portrait that interrogates it quietly, subversively, without announcing itself, with the specific humility of a photographer who understands that his job isn't to make the subject look the way that they want to look. It's to see what's actually there. The professor and Anderson aren't the same argument. The professor here is about presence, earning trust, making someone feel seen in a moment. But Anderson isn't making his subject feel seen. He doesn't care about that. That's not his intent. He's seeing past what she's chosen to show next to that light switch. And that requires something else entirely, a point of view, a perspective sharp enough to know what the light switch means and the courage to leave it in. That's a strategic sacrifice. It's not a mistake. And I want to be very precise about this distinction because I think it matters. Photographers don't make great work by accident. We make it through deliberate choices that don't survive a typical brief. The journalist in a dark room who sacrifices shutter speed for the moment. The portrait photographer who lets the double chin be a double chin because the honesty of it matters more than flattery. The shooter who chooses the grainy frame over the clean one because the grain is the truth of the room at that particular hour. Maybe it's being brave enough to show the side of someone that they might consider terrible. Those aren't errors, my friends. Those are decisions that require you to know what you're after well enough to give something up to get there. AI is frictionless. It provides the statistically likely image, the average result of everything it's ingested. It doesn't sacrifice. It doesn't wait. It cannot be subversive because subversion requires a position, and a position requires a person with something at stake. And you cannot prompt that into existence. Listen, AI has studied every photograph ever made, but it cannot have your specific Tuesday in November when everything was slightly off and the light was doing something that nobody asked for. It cannot have the version of that shoot where you almost packed it up at 3 p.m. because it felt like it was dying. And then something shifted. A subject relaxed. You made a choice that the brief didn't ask for, and something true fell into the frame. It cannot have your brother. It cannot have the version of you that was 23 and broke and shooting everything because you didn't know yet what you were doing. It cannot have the 2 hours you spent waiting for a cloud to move that nobody on the creative brief knew that you were waiting for. That's not sentiment. That's the competitive advantage that compounds instead of erodes. And I drove home from Los Angeles from that weekend meeting with all those photographers and software leaders, thinking about what I wanted to shoot next. Not in the abstract, but specifically, what do I want to make that could only exist because I was the one in the room? What does that brief feel like? What kind of conversation do I need to have with a subject to get to the frame that couldn't have been generated because the frame doesn't exist without what happened in 10 minutes before it. The question is still a few weeks old. I'm still processing. I'm still thinking about it. And I don't have clean answers. But I stopped opening my portfolio looking for my best work to put on a new page. I started opening it looking for the images that have a pulse, that are human, that are honest. Trying to trace the line between what I made when I was fully in the room and what I made when I was executing someone else's version of that room. That line is clearer than I wanted it to be. Look, the conversation about AI and photography has been happening at the wrong altitude. Markets, economics, will there be jobs? Is this the end of stock photography? Those are real questions. I get it. But they're the surface conversation. They're what you talk about when you're not ready to talk about the thing that's underneath. The thing that's underneath is, what were you making before AI arrived and why? Not your best work, not your typical work, the work you made on the average Tuesday when there wasn't anything special about the brief. You showed up and you did your job. Does it have a point of view? Does it have anything in it that required you specifically, or could it have been executed by any competent photographer with the same gear and the same brief? That's the audit, my friends. Not can AI replicate my portfolio, but is there enough of me in my portfolio that there's something to replicate? I sat with that for about 4 days before I could look at it straight. Listen, don't try to outrun the technology. It's futile. Stop running. Go back to the shoot where something went sideways, but you stayed anyway. Go back to the frame you almost didn't take. Go back to the version of you that hadn't yet learned how to pre-visualize the fucking grid. That's what the work is. Not ahead of you, but behind you, waiting to be understood. And for those of you who started this whole game after 2010, 2012, the ones who were born into this fever, this whole thing is harder. You've never known a world where a photograph didn't have to perform. To you, the grid isn't a tool. This is the central source of truth. You were trained to pre-visualize the like before you even learned how to see. You have been living in the cage since day one, and you've gotten so good at decorating the bars, you've forgotten that they're there. But I want you to look closer, real close. Somewhere in your archives, there's a glitch. There's a frame that's too dark, it's too quiet, or too jagged to ever survive the scroll. And maybe you didn't even post it because you were afraid it was too unprofessional. I want you to look at that one. I want you to know that it's not a technical failure or an Instagram failure. That is the only part of you that the algorithm hasn't colonized yet. There's a photograph somewhere in your past, maybe recent, maybe years ago, that you made when you weren't thinking about the brief or the metrics or whether it would fit or get likes or do well. Something happened in front of your lens, and you were present enough, courageous enough, awake enough, and human enough to catch it. You know the one that I mean. That frame is the only piece of evidence that you have that says you were actually in the room. It's the one jagged edge left in a career that's been sanded smooth. If you're looking for a way back to yourself, that's the only door left unlocked. Until next week, stay curious, stay courageous, and yeah, Stay terrible.